Talk 360. Talk 360. For in-depth analysis on the week's news with Latif.
It's coming up to 4:15. Today, let's discuss these guys from the Coast Province who, among many other things, we've heard that they want secession. That's the Mombasa Republican Council. In the studio with me is a man who's been representing them in court. You know what happened earlier in the week. We know that the High Court in Mombasa, three-judge bench, ruled that the Mombasa Republican Council should not be called an outlawed group. In fact, the court went ahead and gave them suggestions on how they should continue operating to agitate for whatever they want to agitate for what they're calling their rights. In the studio is lawyer Abraham Korir Singoe. Welcome, Abraham, and thank you very much for joining us. We're expecting to be joined by the chairman of the National Cohesion and Integration Commission, Dr. Mzalendo Kibunja, when he comes in. Of course, he will be with us. Abraham, the Mombasa Republican Council is not a political party. Mombasa Republican Council is not a union. Mombasa Republican Council is not a criminal gang, now that we've heard. That's what you were telling the court. So who is Mombasa Republican Council?
I think in the words of the court, the Mombasa Republican Council is a political movement. It is a movement that has the intention of pursuing the land rights as well as addressing marginalization of course people within the Kenyan polity. Indeed, the court went ahead to prescribe to them, among other ways of organizing, that they could establish a political party, or they could constitute themselves as a political party. But as it is right now, they are a political movement.
They are a political movement, and their main, let's say, their main bargaining chip is that they want to secede from Kenya. They want to form their own country at the coast.
The point that they make is that Pwani is Kenya.
Yep.
And that is a position that they hold out. Obviously, that should not just really be taken literally. I mean, there's several layers there. I think Mombasa Pwani si Kenya essentially is a cry for inclusion as opposed to a cry for exclusion.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people in Turkana, when you go up north, they would ask you or tell you, habari ya Kenya, you know?
Yeah.
That doesn't necessarily mean that the Turkanas don't consider themselves Kenyans. They feel so removed from this country called Kenya as we know it, you know, that sometimes, you know, this contraption of the state is just alien. So Mombasa, Pwani si Kenya as a slogan, is not necessarily equal to secession per se.
But that's what they're asking for.
Haven't
they specifically said
that is the
we
position.
want to form our own government along the coastal strip?
The point they make is that they seek greater autonomy, greater control of their resources, greater voice, greater say in the affairs, you know, that affect them. Those are the fundamental issues they talk about. You know, and that is why I keep insisting that people shouldn't pay as much attention to this so-called mantra. They should actually look at what are the core grievances that is driving this group. You know, those are the interests of this group. And I think being able to address their interests, you know, means like, you know, for everybody else, that their position can always change.
Well, I know you're a lawyer who always champions the rights of the minorities, and I'm sure that's what attracted you to this case, and that's what made you want to get involved in the case for the MRC. Now, the MRC, by their name, Mombasa Republican Council, I was asking you this off the air. When they call themselves Mombasa Republican Council, it just shows that they are thinking of themselves as Mombasa. Who's representing the people of Voi, for example? The Taita, the Wadawida, the other guys in far in Tana River. Who represents them? Why aren't they talking of calling themselves Pwani Republican Council?
You know, I can't say for sure. Like, the choice of name sounds problematic the way you put it, But I think that that's an internal conversation for the coastal people. I haven't had anybody question, the notion that the name of MRC means that it's exclusive only to the people from Mombasa. I imagine that Mombasa occupies a very special place in coastal politics, as the seat of ideology and political formation. I believe that Mombasa is that seat from where all these ideas permeate to the rest of the coastal region, and so I think it's not entirely problematic for them to be called Mombasa Republican Council. It doesn't necessarily show that it's exclusive of the other regions.
From your interactions with them, do you think MRC is representative of all the main groups that are resident in Mombasa?
The papers that
the
papers that were presented in Coast were supported by signatures of people from all the counties in the Coast region, which and there were like 30,000 signatures, which indicates to me that at least MRC has it has membership, if I may call it that is spread across the entire region.
So if it's representative of all the people from the entire coastal region, is it the indigenous people of coast region, or is it the people who are resident there currently?
The emphasis of MRC is to say that the voices of indigenous communities at the coast have been muted and overwhelmed, and those voices are lacking in coastal development, in decision-making processes, etc. And so it is these voices that MRC actually seeks to
amplify.
Or to amplify, yes.
Let's look at the leadership of Coast Province since independence. The main leaders of the Coast Province are not Watokabara. If you look at from Ronald Ngala to the current leadership, from Mokwere to Najib Balala to Mungatanas, all the current MPs and the leading lights in politics are actually people who are indigenous coastal people.
Absolutely.
Look at the councillors. If you go to any part of coast, apart from a very few areas where you'll find maybe Mtokabara is a councillor, the rest of the people are indigenous coastal people. So what's the case for MRC?
I think that's really part of what this is about. It is both an external discourse, but it's also internal. I mean, MRC is emerging out of a leadership vacuum. There's a feeling that coastal leadership since independence, has been appropriated, if you like, by what is otherwise known as mainstream Kenyan interests. And so they are seen really as bearers and as carriers and as as articulators of the interests, not of the coastal people at all, but of either their own personal interests on one hand, or on the other hand, actually, they represent interests of the moneyed actors within the larger Kenyan society.
So they feel that their leadership has sort of been planted.
Absolutely. They feel that their leadership, the entire leadership paradigm in the coast has been rigged in favor of individuals who do not represent coastal interests. And so it is really a problematization of leadership as currently constructed at the coast as well.
So you have dealt with them. Who started MRC? Was it a group of elders? Was it some former radicals? Was it some jailbirds who sat down and thought, you know what, we're tired of fighting this way, let's fight a different way?
You know what, I'm a lawyer, so I haven't really spent time studying the history of the group.
Come on, Abraham, for you to represent them in court, and especially to go to court
yes,
and say that this group is not a criminal organization.
Yes, it
you
did.
definitely must know then what is this group? Who started this group? What was the motive?
Absolutely.
What drives these people?
I can tell you that the group is a peasant movement group. It's really a group of villagers who are just totally fed up with the status quo in coastal politics. And these individuals have, they're constantly harangued by the rules of engagement. They do not understand why they're constantly being evicted from their land. They do not understand why the laws of their their customary rules in relation to land cannot protect them. Okay? They do not understand why, whenever there is a development program, nobody asks them anything about it, And when they seek recourse before either Kenyan courts or their own leadership, nobody gives them any satisfactory responses. And everybody says, we've got to go back to Nairobi. And so these guys are like, look, isn't there something that we can do on our own as a people from the, from
Can't
the
we
coast?
make our village Nairobi?
Can't we turn this into Nairobi?
I'm sure they're aware that they participated in the 2010 referendum. And therefore,
quite a lot of people at the coast
they must be
voted.
aware that we have a new constitution.
They are pretty much aware.
They're aware that our new constitution has devolved power. So what is it that would now make them come out and say, you know what, even with all this new system of governance that we've been brought to us with the constitution, we still need to agitate further?
The problem actually is that this group, in a way, really has very limited trust of the Kenyan state, so to speak, and the Kenyan state's leadership, okay? So that they argue that even if the constitution has all these beautiful provisions that could potentially address their problems right now, no one's going to implement them, okay? Second, even if they're implemented, it will just be like very perfunctory implementation. It will be rigged implementation. And they cite historical, evidence. They argue that at independence, Kenya adopted a beautiful constitution, for that time, that had all these regional governments, semi-autonomous units, etc., etc. But within 5 years of independence,
all that had been wiped off.
That had been changed, and in place we had an imperial presidency, And so essentially they're like, look, we cannot trust the Kenyan government to implement this thing. So we've got a serious trust problem vis-a-vis the mainstream state.
What's their feeling on violence?
They have made it very, very, very clear that they are a peace-loving organization, that they will pursue this agenda through engagement, through dialogue, through legal channels. And that's really why they have judicialized this grievance, as opposed to, going to the forest and, and sharpening their harpoons and using it against their neighbors. They've made that very, very clear, and they've got all sorts of ideas about other judicial mechanisms that could be applicable. They keep talking about, the International Court of Justice, which clearly doesn't necessarily have jurisdiction over some of the issues here, as a potential, place that they could go to if, for instance, they had lost this particular case, and so, they abhor violence. That they have made very clear, and so I have no doubt in my mind that they will not embrace or pursue violence unless, of course, they're driven to the wall through violence on the part of the state.
Would you say that it's MRC, or is it imposters who went and caused violence when the IEBC was conducting mock elections in Malindi?
I think MRC has made its position very clear. It has been vehement in its denial that it was in any way, involved in the violence in Malindi.
So that was an MRC.
They have made it very clear that it had nothing to do with them. And as you know, since the banning of MRC, there's been a massive campaign on the part of the state, to attribute every negative occurrence of the course to MRC.
Just to demonize them.
Just to demonize them. And they've taken serious exceptions to that.
But MRC has been on record, has gone on record saying that they do not want their people to participate in Kenyan elections
Yes,
because they're not part of Kenya.
that's the argument they advance.
So they do not want to participate in anything that IEBC organizes at the coast.
In a sense, they do not want to participate. Yes,
Is that the right way to go?
not necessarily. I don't think, actually. I don't necessarily think that the strategy that is being employed is necessarily the most, the most beneficial to them.
Right.
But in a democratic state, there's so much that one can do. You've got to afford them the opportunity to persuade, because I believe that, and this is what the court actually makes very clear, that in a plural system, in an open and democratic system, there will be all this, there will be all these divergences of views, and people should be able to tolerate this to the extent that no one's rights have been violated. And so that's really the position. And I was making this point as well, that in the past, cases of, low voter turnout, for example, at the coast have been rampant. On average, the coast registers and records the lowest voter turnout, compared to other regions. Part of it is just because of illiteracy, okay? But part of it is just disenchantment with the quality of leadership. And people are like, does it really make a difference?
It doesn't help us at all.
Exactly. So it's and that hasn't been because of MRC necessarily. It's because of MRC. So I don't.
It's not because of MRC as a group, but it's because of MRC membership. They're the same people.
Not in the past. MRC membership never existed in the past, assumedly, until just a few years ago, maybe a year or two ago. So.
Yeah. In the studio on Talk 360 this afternoon is Abraham Korir Singoe. He is a lawyer who represented the Mombasa Republican Council in the, let's just call it the ongoing court tussle with the government. And what they're trying to do is address their issues and bring their issues to the fore. My name is Eric Latif, and I have a lot of comments coming in on Facebook. If you log into Facebook, Capital FM Kenya, and also on my Facebook, Eric Latif. And also, if you're on Twitter, hashtag is Talk 360. Very many people commenting and talking about this issue, Abraham. Signatures can be forged. We've already seen that happening in party registrations. I think this is in response to you saying that you saw them coming to the court with papers saying, that they brought signatures showing that their membership is spread across the coast region. MRC is not the problem. This is Chris Owala, he says. But failure to address past historical justice, high level of impunity within political class, and youth unemployment. That's what he considers to be the problem. Komida says, since the current government seems not to be taking caution of their needs and their wants, why don't they try new leaders? As one said, maybe ile shida walionayo kwa sasa huenda ikatatuliwa. Why not participate in leadership and change? Like you said, why not bring our own Nairobi to where we are and address our issues? Therefore, why not take up this opportunity of changing your own leadership and saying we the people who are championing the MRC cause should get into government?
To be honest, I'm not the strategic advisor for MRC necessarily on the broader questions. I'm interested in MRC, or we're supporting or helping MRC just in relation to issues around their freedom to express themselves and their freedom to assemble, which has been denied by the state, and with respect to which, the court has ruled that the state has no basis for doing that at this point in time. Okay? But as to, like I said, as to the, to the efficacy of their broader strategy, I may have my own views about it. I don't necessarily think that it's the best thing to do, I think that this is a great opportunity, and I think what we are trying to do is persuade MRC that, look, can we give this constitution a chance? It's true, there's a massive trust deficit that I have talked about, vis-a-vis the state, but this is a new constitution that has institutions that will actually ensure that even central government itself will not have its way. And so can we give it a chance? Can we give devolution a chance? You know, can MRC transform its social capital that it has generated because of standing up for coastal, grievances into political capital by way of ensuring that people with credibility, and who truly want to serve this community, these communities, are elected into parliament, and for me that would be a more rational strategy. But like I said, in a democratic system, and within my broad mandates as a lawyer, there's so much that I can do. I can only represent these guys in court, but beyond that, that's someone else's job.
You're a champion.
There's a huge place for civil society, in my view.
You're a champion for minority rights. Looking at the coast region, there's a case for very many people feeling marginalized and disenfranchised. But in your opinion, as somebody who stands up for the minority, what is the best way to address all these grievances that the people of Coast Province may have?
That's a big question. But I think part of addressing, or part of the solutions for addressing the problems that minorities have across the board, is really through ensuring effective implementation of the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So, for instance, if in relation to land, okay, the Constitution prescribes the establishment of a National Land Commission, a commission whose mandate would include, among others, the redress for historical injustices relating to land. All right. So ensuring that the composition of the Land Commission is one that is one representative of the best people who are really committed to land reform is one way of doing that. Right now, the nominees for the Land Commission, for example, has someone from the coast as the chair.
Yep.
Which is a very good thing. I think it indicates, for instance, that there is sensitivity around just the complexity of the grievances relating to land at the coast. So that would be one way, like institutionalize some of these problems, establish an institutional framework. The Constitution establishes several other institutions. The Gender Commission, the Gender and Equality Commission, has a very specific mandate now to deal with minority rights, sort of grievances. But in a way, then, these institutions, or rather, these problems are spread across so many institutions as it is, that I think it is a little confusing for a lot of minorities. Is it possible for the state to actually have like a standing institution that deals with the violation of minority rights, issues? Okay, is it possible to have a single institution that can address those issues within the shortest time possible? Because time is also a matter of concern.
Yeah, you don't want your issues being addressed over a generation or two.
Absolutely, time is of essence in relation to most of these issues. But secondly, also, it's really also about political participation and voice. The Constitution makes proposals about how that can be done. There's an Article 100 about Parliament legislating in terms of how minorities can be represented both at the national level, but also within the county systems. But so far, because obviously minorities do not make such, one, they do not have a very strong voice right now nationally. Secondly, they don't make much difference in terms of changing, the voting situations. They're just few in number. Parliament hasn't even legislated yet. So we're going into an election without really knowing how we will ensure minorities are represented effectively. And that will go towards, again, denying these people or these communities a voice. It will go into, again, just making them feel excluded, making them feel less and less of, participants in this commonwealth called Kenya. So.
In your own personal assessment, do you think the central government is blocking any attempt at addressing past historical injustices, at elevating the minorities?
I think so. Absolutely.
How so?
For this reason. I think it's just the level of vested interests. The Kenyan elite, the Kenyan political and economic elite, is very stable. It's been so stable for the last 40, 50 years. It's the same people, really. You know, it's a game of, you know, moving from one door to another, you know. But so in a sense, I mean, the big landowners and, you know, and business owners who've got stakes in in territories occupied by minorities, you know, remain the same people who have access to political and economic power in this country. And so they have absolutely no interest in ensuring that those minorities, whose resources they're now exploiting for their own benefits, you know, become enfranchised. They have absolutely no interest in. And so I'm afraid that central government hasn't demonstrated sufficient interest in ensuring that this agenda is sufficiently responded to.
Zachary Nduati says, this historical injustice, how can it be addressed? Take land, for example. The government should produce title deeds to land in the coast, but you can't stop anyone with money from buying it. Looks like the MRC want things for free without working. Look at education. Schools are full with teachers from upcountry because of the simple reason that they refused to go to school. When the government brings qualified people to run the coast, they don't want. If we don't give them, then it's another problem.
You know, I'm just really afraid that that's precisely the attitude that isn't helpful in these circumstances. It's the attitude of Madarao, you know? It says that, you know, the government here, we know what is good for you. It's so paternalistic, it's so patronizing, you know? And yet, it is actually possible through dialogue to actually be able to understand what it is that can work best in their context. You know, I don't believe that these communities do not really want to work. You know, I don't believe they shun education institutions out of choice. I believe that there are structural constraints, you know, to their access of these opportunities. I mean, if they don't go to school, obviously they cannot fill those jobs. You know, whatever you know, job opportunities open up, they won't be qualified enough. You know, so you perpetuate that cycle of dependency, you know, by not increasing the capacity of these communities to actually take advantage of those opportunities. And that's probably why it was interesting to listen to President Kibaki the other day when he was opening or, you know, laying the foundation stone for the Lamu port. You know, the first thing he said was, look, we'll set up an institution here in Lamu that will train several, you know, people from Lamu.
But you must remember that this came just 2 days before the launch.
This came 2 days before the launch. That, I mean, if the government had been planning to build this port, which it has been,
it should have been among the first things they do.
It should have done so 10 years ago, so that these guys could actually immediately benefit from that opportunity, you know? So this is really the problem with the cost. It's very easy to blame the victim. But as it is, really, I mean, these guys have real serious and difficult grievances. And I think it's in the interest of the whole country, really, to begin to think in a more constructive way about, you know, how can we ensure that everybody begins to really feel that this is my country, that this is my home, you know? Because when we feel like that, you know, we will not invest in destroying this place. You know, we will instead deploy our energies towards building it in a sustainable fashion, because it's a beautiful country. And I think the people at the coast want this to be their home. They want to feel that this is their home as much as the rest of us do.
But you know, I haven't heard anybody from the MRC actually coming out to say, look, as MRC, these are our grievances, and we're using this slogan of Pwani Si Kenya to basically demonstrate that we feel that we're not part of Kenya. And this is what we'd like. This is how we'd like to engage with the rest of Kenya, with our brothers and sisters in Kenya. We want to empower ourselves. We want title deed to our lands. We want to be able to farm. We want to be able to trade. We want to be able to do much more economically as the rest of Kenyans. But what they're saying is simple. They're just simply saying, Pwani Si Kenya, we want Pwani to be ours.
How could they
you
do
guys
that
go,
when
they
were already a banned group, you know? How could they begin that process of
That's
engagement?
what made them become a banned group.
You know, but that's
because
putting
of
the
their
cart
talk.
before the horse. You know, you ban them first, and then you arrest everybody, and then you shut down the political space, and you expect them to now start coming out and talking about it? No. It's really very, very difficult. You know, and that's why the court emphasized that, you know, that there could be concerns about MRC, but give us the evidence first. You don't shut down all the space that could potentially be available to to these guys, and then turn around and say that they're criminals. They're a bunch of criminals. No, instead you try to direct them to those opportunities, and then indeed if they don't respond to them, then and they deploy violence in the process, then you can take action. But they apply to be registered as a society, and you even return their papers. You're like, no, we won't even receive them. You don't ascribe any reasons for doing that. What can they do?
So they had sought registration.
This
as a
was
society.
very early in the process. Yes, a couple of years ago.
They wanted to be a society.
They wanted to be a society, so that they could meet, and they just wouldn't be allowed to do that. And then suddenly the ban came in. So these are the difficulties that these guys face.
So here they are.
Yeah.
They have formed themselves, or whatever grouping that they are. I don't know what you want to call them, a political movement.
That's what the court calls them, finally.
That's what the court called them. Yeah. And the court advised them to go and seek registration as a political party. Do they have any chance of being registered as a political party? Let's remove what you call Madarao from the government. As a grouping that comes and says we are advocating for the rights of one region, can they even be considered for registration as a party?
I don't think so. I think it's very clear right now that under the political parties law, first the choice of name has to sort of espouse
national,
universalist and national values. The objectives as well have to be articulated in terms of national interests, etc., etc. Membership has to be spread across, all the counties. Officials, have to come from all those regions. So it's such an onerous burden for a group whose focus is very particularistic to a specific region, to comply with. It's almost impossible for them to do.
For them to ever get registered.
Exactly, it's very, very difficult.
You're their lawyer. You of course.
With respect to this matter.
Only.
With respect to this matter.
But when you're sitting and having coffee and just going through this court case and saying, we are supposed to go back to court on this day and all these things, you obviously get an opportunity to have one-on-one moments with them, and where you can advise them on what you'd like them to do. Do you at any point tell them, guys, I think you should change your strategy? Or do you meet with your strategists and tell them, you guys, your strategy, I think, having dealt with these issues for a long time, I think your strategy is wrong in this respect, and maybe you could alter your strategy to move this way? I'm looking at all these comments that are here. Very many people are saying, I hate this MRC idea, just because of that issue of secession.
Right. No, certainly. I mean, I think what we have, or at least what I have made very clear to this group, is that if the ban is lifted, this was hypothetically before the ban got lifted. The ban was lifted, then is it possible to engage in a process of constructive engagement or constructive dialogue with the state with respect to these grievances? Okay, are there certain current demands that can be dropped in the short term to give the state an opportunity to prove, its good intentions? Is there,
and give yourselves
give yourselves an opportunity as well to test the veracity of the new institutions that have been created. So are there certain demands that in the short term can be put aside to allow for all these processes to mature? And so my advice has been very, very strong in terms of, can we ensure that we take advantage of this window of opportunity presented by the new constitution, particularly at the county level, particularly the land injustices being addressed through the National Land Commission, among others. Is it possible? I mean, if there are capacity gaps, because like I said, MRC is a peasant movement. These are guys out from the village, but they are very sophisticated in their thinking. They think in a particular way. And they're very, they when they take a position, they're very, very strong. But nevertheless, because of that, they sort of feel there's this mistrust about, or this lack of confidence about engaging, directly with the state. They also feel vulnerable. They feel like probably, the state may take advantage of them.
They'll get arrested.
So,
and
are
they'll
there
disappear.
opportunities then? Are there opportunities to build their capacity,
Mm-hmm.
or to incorporate within its membership, certain competencies that can then engage with the state? So all these are sort of proposals that we have made to the group, and I'm sure that now that the ban has been lifted, this group could be amenable to some of these proposals.
So it's the reception to your advice was good. Would you say it was positive?
Like I said, it was all done before the ban was lifted.
Yeah.
At which point they were just like, let's wait for we can't even talk about engaging with the state right now because we're a banned group. But once that happens, then we can consider these proposals. And I think listening to them, some of their responses after the decision, a number of them have already indicated, like the chair indicated, that they were willing to explore ways of engaging with the state.
Well,
and so I think this is a huge opportunity both for the state, and for MRC. And I think, and I've said this before, it's not really an opportunity for anybody to chest thump. We love this country, and I think for all of us, it should be an opportunity to say, look, what can we do to bring our brothers and sisters on board, because we don't want to lose the Kenyan coast in any way. We don't want to lose it by way of violence perpetrated by the state.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want any part of that territory to cease to be part of this beautiful country. No, we don't.
Very many comments are coming in. Before judging these guys harshly, why don't you give them a chance to explain to Kenya why they think Mombasa is not part of Kenya? You never know. Maybe they have a point. That's Alvis Ebwani. Henry Karani says, was all the hullabaloo about the 10-mile strip? Why don't they advocate for semi-autonomy for the coast? Come to think, hasn't it been guaranteed by the constitution in the county government's provision, that they have an opportunity to have their own government. There's a government that's in the county system of government. How many districts do you have? How many counties are we going to have in the coast? We're going to have 6 counties at the coast province. But they are not looking at this from the point of they want to take over the leadership.
Right. I mentioned already that part of the problem is this trust deficit. How they just feel that, that...
I think that's an excuse, Abraham. Excuse me, but because I'm thinking...
Admittedly, but it's a deep-felt excuse, okay? And when you're dealing with stabilization or destabilization issues, you've got to take in trust issues. Because before somebody comes to the table, they want to be sure that, that this guy would not pull the rug under my feet. That's what they want to be confident about. So yeah, it's true. I think, if we can address those trust issues and MRC leadership begins to feel like, the Kenyan state is actually open to engaging with them, I'm sure they will concede some grounds. I'm sure they will concede some of what is perceived to be.
But there's a deeper
grounds.
issue here. There's the issue of trusting the national government, the state and all. But there is also the issue of you believing that you can make a difference wherever you are. I believe they formed themselves as MRC, believing that they could make a difference. Why don't they come together and decide that we're going to take Mzee Ranje and make Mzee Ranje our leader, and make Mzee Rai spokesman, and make Mzee whatever, and Mama so and so to be the people who are representing us in the county assembly, who are representing us in the Senate, who are representing us in the National Assembly. Why don't they want to do that? This is not an issue of trust. Are you saying that they don't trust their neighbors? Because if you wanted to make Abraham our local representative at the county assembly, we'd all come up, vote, and have Abraham in.
No, I concede that, it sounds, from that perspective to be an unreasonable sort of proposition. But this, this really underlines just how afraid this group really is. They don't see that they have a chance to even execute that plan of action as you have proposed. within this polity unless there's that this guarantees, and so it's really difficult to say, and that's part of what I'm saying. There's need to inject quite some capacity, and some dialogue that probably also just involves people from the coast. There's need to have a conversation, a coastal conversation, a very open and candid conversation at the coast, but also there's need to have a conversation in Nairobi. Like, look, there are all sorts of people around us who really feel excluded. They may not be speaking about not being Kenyan,
but there are very many who feel.
There are many people who feel Kenya see Kenya.
Yeah.
For them, So the problems of inclusion are so deep-seated in this country, and that's why people run to their ethnic communities. They form parties that have big national names, but they're nothing other than ethnic vehicles. And so, we may, as the rest of Kenyans, we may look with disdain at what MRC is talking about, but MRC, because of the level of education of its leaders, do not have the finesse to be able to clock these agenda in nationalistic terms or in national terms. They're just very open to what their actual interests are.
It exposes some other failures now.
Yes.
We talked about failure by the national government. We talked about failure by the local leadership of the coast province, because when the people of the coast are feeling that their issues have never been addressed, yet they've had leaders from their areas in parliament, in government, as cabinet ministers all these years, it just basically means that their leadership has failed. But then there's also a third arm here, the civil society. Ever since MRC came up, I actually haven't heard of many civil societies that have come up and said, yes, we are identifying with what the MRC are saying. Maybe their strategy is wrong, but trying to basically bring the government to tell them, sit with this group, hear them out, cut before they become violent, hear them out and see how you can address their issues. No civil society organization has basically come out. Well, they may be there, but quietly.
Absolutely. I think it's true. This agenda hasn't really been, it's not been taken seriously enough by civil society. There are activities obviously going on at the coast in relation to this issue, but they're very low-key, like you mentioned. But I think part of it also was just, this ban really complicated everything, because even civil society were feeling insecure about, how do we begin to talk about this thing with the state when, we will be accused of being complicit, or being accessories after the fact, in relation to this issue.
And threats to national security.
Exactly. So the ban really complicated everything. That's why the court was like, look, this is the most restrictive means, of addressing this problem. Okay? Are there other means for dealing with it? So you lift the ban, that affords space for civil society to, I think, get in there with greater confidence and greater clarity about what they could potentially do.
Do you see any hope for the issues that are being raised by the MRC and any other groups being addressed, like in the near future?
I think, like I said, I see a lot of hope, yes. We've got a beautiful new constitution. We've got a judiciary right now that is completely determined to cut a different path for itself, with a leadership that is radically defensive of the independence of the judiciary. I believe that if the institutions that we are setting up, could truly espouse the same independence, the same determined independence, and pursue its mandates with vigor and with the real desire to bring on board every Kenyan. I don't see these issues as totally intractable. I don't think they cannot be addressed. So I have hope. I do have hope.
Apart from this MRC, what other cases or issues are you championing right now as an advocate for minority rights?
Yeah. I've got all sorts of really difficult cases right now.
Your plate is full.
Plate is full. But we are involved in litigation, obviously, in relation to the Lamu port. not so much because communities in Lamu are opposed to the idea of the port, but they are opposed to the idea that they don't know anything about the port. You know, that nobody has spoken to them about the impact that that port will have on its on their environment, the beautiful heritage in Lamu. Nobody has spoken to them about, how they will take advantage and maximize the opportunities that will arise from that port. Nobody's speaking to them about it. They're just hearing, from third parties. They see people flying in and flying out from Nairobi. They hear about land being acquired left, right, and center, but they have no idea. So we are involved in that kind of litigation to ensure that the voices of Lamu people,
of the local Lamu people,
can be heard, in that process. I mean, obviously, I'm also involved in cases in Laikipia, huge issues of land grabbing and then land acquisition by, multinational corporations that then ends up in the creation of national parks, national reserves, or, all of it having huge economic benefit
to minority,
to actors other than minorities themselves. So minorities are forced to bear such huge burden in terms of environmental damage, in terms of loss of grazing land, and in terms of livelihoods, and yet they get no benefit from whatever development program, is being initiated. And that's really the tragedy of development in this country.
Apart from the MRC case, which other one have you won?
Well, I think the most important case that I have won is the case involving the Andorois in Lake Bogoria.
Yeah.
A case that we won at the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, which determined that the Kenyan state was in violation of the rights of property of the Andorois, as well as the right to development, among others, and ordered the Kenyan government to restitute the land back to the Andorois, and pay compensation for the loss of livelihood, loss of housing, etc., etc. But up until now, the Kenyan government hasn't quite implemented that decision. I also have won a case on behalf of the Nubian community in Kibera, involving the right of their children to nationality and citizenship. A case that we won before the Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child at the African Union in Addis Ababa. And again, that is a decision that's still pending. I mean, there's still an onerous burden placed upon the Nubians to prove nationality.
That they are Kenyan.
That they are Kenyans, So there are all these very difficult issues that I'm sort of involved with right now. So
difficult indeed, and thank you very much for what you're doing and for championing the rights of the minority. Abraham Korir Singoe is representing the Mombasa Republican Council as well as very many other minority groups across the country. And thank you for coming to Talk 360 and talking to us. And let's hope that actually the MRC gets some good leadership that advises them well, that shows them this is the way to go, and that Kenyans can begin opening up to the issues being raised by the MRC. And I believe that will happen when MRC itself stops talking about seceding from the rest of Kenya. I don't see this changing if MRC still wants secession. Thank you very much, Korir, for coming. My name is Eric Latif, and thank you very much also for listening to Talk 360. Catch you again here next week. Have a lovely week ahead.
98.4 Capital FM.